Good evening.
Good evening.
I'd like to welcome you to the October 1st, 2025 Planning and Zoning Commission of Carroll County. Can we start by establishing a quorum?
Yes. Good evening, everyone.
Good
Good
evening.
evening.
Ms. Kirkner,
Here.
Mr. Kane,
Here.
Mr. Huff, Mr. Robertson,
Here.
Mr. Swayston,
Here.
Mr. Lester, Mr. Smith,
Here.
Mr. Gordon, Secretary Daly.
Here.
Madam Chair, please let the record reflect that 5 members are present and we do have a quorum.
Okay, great. All right. Excuse me. Can we stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, did you all get a chance to review the agenda? Okay, then I'll entertain
All right.
and approve.
I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda for October 1, 2025 Planning and Zoning meeting.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Number 5 has been removed. Number 6, Secretary Daly, Administrative Matters.
Thank you. I don't have any administrative matters for tonight.
Okay. Any other? Nope. Okay. Moving right along. The text amendment. Use off the premise signs.
Yes, yeah.
Oh,
Good evening. Yes,
lots of people coming.
yes, good evening. So we have a citizen request was made to the Board of County Commissioners related to Section 158.115 related to off-premises signs. It's a section of the zoning code. So we have a couple of representatives who presented that information to the Board of County Commissioners. The board did agree to ask staff to bring that before you all to discuss the proposed revisions and then return with recommendations to the Board of County Commissioners. So the way we'll progress is Ms. Miller is here. She made an excellent presentation to the Board of County Commissioners regarding all of the substance related to the request. So we'll have an introduction tonight. And then and obviously if you have any questions, you can certainly ask them tonight. Then our next meeting, our zoning administrator will be here to talk about the proposed text amendments and any consequences and so on for discussion. And then we will have whatever discussion you all may have and then whatever recommendations you may have about it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Miller to make introductions and proceed with the presentation.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone. Good evening. Kelly Schaefer Miller, 73 East Main Street, Westminster, Maryland, 21157. I am here tonight on behalf of Clear Channel Outdoor, and I have Mr. Steve Brevinick next to me, and here as a representative of Clear Channel Outdoor. Clear Channel owns, and you'll hear about this in our presentation in just a minute, but they own several of the billboards, panels, use off the premise signs in Carroll County and the surrounding regions. So we have made a proposed text amendment request to the Board of County Commissioners. The concept has been introduced, as Chris said, and now we are before your body requesting a recommendation at next meeting of the text amendment back to the County Commissioners. So I'm going to lay the foundation and explain our request, and we're here and happy to answer any questions that you have tonight, and we can also bring any additional information at the next meeting if there's something that would be helpful that we don't have this evening. So what is a use off the premises sign? So I wanted to lay a little bit of the foundation in the existing code so that everyone understands. I know that you often are reviewing signage, but probably not this signage as much, and this is definitely a nuanced section of the code. So a use off the premises sign is also known as an outdoor advertising sign. That is defined in your definition section of your zoning ordinance as a sign structure which directs attention to a business, commodity, service, or entertainment not necessarily conducted, sold, or offered upon the premises where such a sign is located. So therefore, this section of the code governs billboards in Carroll County. Anytime there's a sign that's advertising something that is not the business on the property, it is governed by this section of the code. That's 158, 115. So a little bit of history. Prior to August 18th, 2003, billboards were permitted across the county in various sizes. On August 18th, 2003, there was text adopted in the code that restricted some of the sizes of those boards. And so most of the boards that you're familiar with seeing around the county have existed since or prior to that date. You're not seeing new billboards pop up after that August 18th, 2003 date, at least not on any regular basis. So after that magic date, regulations were adopted, like I said, that restrict the height and size of billboards. And what that did was that made most of the existing billboards around the county what we call non-conforming uses in height and size and the use itself. So at that time, on that magic date, what the county did in an effort to track the existing boards around the county is they created a registry of these non-conforming billboards. And that's a registry that the zoning administration office holds. And what they had was every owner of board submitted a sort of few-page application that listed the height and the size and the location of the sign, and those are categorized by their location around the county. So that is a resource that anyone can look to and that the zoning administration office keeps up in their normal course of business. So under section 158, 115, there are provisions that allow for certain things with these existing non-conforming boards. And you may have seen some of this happen across the county. So for example, boards can be rebuilt or repaired in the same height and size that they currently exist. So there was one you might be familiar with kind of on that hill near the Olive Garden. During a big storm, it fell down. It was allowed to be permitted and replaced in the same location, same height, same size. That's just an example that I'm familiar with, but there are several of those that we've seen happen. This is specific, now jumping specifically to the commercial and industrial zones. In the commercial and industrial zones, you can also apply for conversion of an existing board to a digital board. And you have also seen that happen in certain places in the county. I think most of you are probably familiar with the one in Finksburg, kind of right at DD across from Mudgett's Auto Body. That is a Clear Channel board, and we went through an application process to convert that board to digital. Again, those boards can't get any bigger and they can't get any taller. They stay in the same general location. Usually there's a bit more of a substantial footer required for the digital boards, but they stay in the same general location and they're the same height and same size. That is an application process that is available to any sign in that, or any use off the premise sign in a commercial or industrial zone that goes before the zoning administrator. It's publicly advertised. There is a hearing held if anyone requests a hearing to be held, and then there is an administrative decision on the conversion request from the zoning administrator. So that's what we have. Everything I just described is what we already have in our code today. Now getting to what this proposal is requesting and providing for. So the impetus for this request is that Clear Channel was looking at some of their boards across the county and noticing that there are some properties or directly adjacent properties where there are several boards. If you drive up and down 140, you probably can think of some of the ones that I'm thinking of, where you'll see several billboards back to back to back. And it came to their attention that it could be beneficial both for them and for the county to eliminate some of those boards and sort of consolidate them into one board on certain properties. So that's the impetus for this request. And I'm going to walk you through the specifics of what we're proposing, but that kind of lays the foundation for it. So we are providing for a consolidation process within that existing section of the code, 158, 115. And it would be that consolidation of boards would be subject to the following. So boards or panels on the same property or adjacent properties would be eligible for this. They would have to be on the same or adjacent properties. You couldn't go around the county and go, well, I've got a board here and I've got a board down in Eldersburg and I've got a board here and I want to consolidate them all. It would have to be on the same property or an immediately adjacent property. We also said that consolidation means that 2 or more panels could be reconstructed to make one sign. I think that's just sort of a definition of what consolidation means. The consolidated boards would also be eligible under the existing provisions regarding the digital conversion. So if a board was in the correct zone and was otherwise eligible to apply for the digital conversion, we're saying that it could also be consolidated and apply for a digital conversion, just as the existing boards are eligible for now. The process that we're proposing to go through this, to request a consolidation of boards, is an application to the zoning administrator, akin to the digital conversion process. It's, I believe it's governed under the administrative adjustment language in terms of how this application happens, but there would be an application that would need to request this approval through the zoning administrator. I can't remember if my next slide keeps going, so if not, I'll keep going. So that request would then be publicly advertised. This is not on this slide. I just jumped ahead, sorry. That application would be publicly advertised, and if a hearing was requested, a public hearing would be held. If no public hearing was requested, then it would be an administrative decision, just as the digital conversion process is now in the code. So that's the process that we've proposed. Now, the slide that I've just jumped you to is the restrictions that we've proposed. And I want to backtrack for a second and just let you know that this is not just a text that I came up with one day and we started with at the county. We went through many iterations of this draft, and we did have meetings with county staff as well to talk it through and make sure that, number one, everybody felt like it really said what we thought it said, because sometimes that can be an issue in interpretation, and also think of ways that we could couch this such as it is not creating unintended consequences. So we have proposed in the draft several restrictions to this eligibility for consolidation. Those restrictions are listed here, and I'll go through them. So the gist would be that consolidation, if one exercised this application process, could not result in a bigger board than the boards that existed on the property. So you would not be seeing an increase in the square footage of advertising than already existed. Now, with that, we put a cap on it, because what if there were, I don't think this exists, but what if there were 10 boards on one property in Carroll? If that resulted in like a massive billboard, we put a maximum square footage allowance on it. So the maximum square footage that we said is 672 square feet. That would be a double-sided panel board, 672 feet, 2 square feet each, and that equates to a 14 by 48 foot sign. So if you couldn't, I just want to be clear, if your square footage in consolidation came in lower than that, you couldn't just get that. It would be that this would be the maximum. If your square footage of your signage consolidated exceeded this, you couldn't exceed this. This is a cap. This is not intended to give you more. So that's how that is proposed. Then we also propose that the location of this consolidated sign must not be closer to the property frontage and has to be in reasonable proximity to one of the signs that you are working to consolidate. So that would be part of the application packet and part of the review by the zoning administrator. And I will also add here, because the question came up at the commissioner level, and I'm sure we'll address it again in a public hearing setting. State Highway does review these signs and issue permits for these signs as well. So that's a separate reviewing agency, in addition to the county too. So there are certain things that we would have to comply with from State Highway in addition to what exists in the county code. And almost all of the billboards are on state highways. Maybe not all of them, but most of them are. So that was one restriction. The next one is that we must comply with all of the operational and lighting requirements that exist in the code today. So there are very strict illumination requirements that exist in the code today. And anytime a sign requests a digital conversion, you have to affirm that you will comply with those illumination requirements. And so we would propose that, again, those would be the exact same that they already are in the code. These are stricter than what you might see if you see, like, you know, if I put a Schaefer, Miller, and Herf law sign out with flashing lights, that is not as strictly governed as these signs. So when you see these digital conversions, you're seeing them in a much more appealing, perhaps illuminated fashion, and they're subject to very strict requirements in a permitting process. So these signs would also be subject to that. We also set a maximum height of 50 feet, so that even if you had a sign, which I think most of them are, I shouldn't say most, but I don't know that any are above 50 feet in Carroll County. I think some of them you might find are at about 50, but we set a maximum just to avoid any ambiguity there. And then we said that if the consolidation allowance is utilized, that property would not be eligible for another use off the premises sign. And I think what's important to understand here is that currently you can still request a use off the premises sign. It's just limited to, I think it's 32 square feet. So if I had a property and I wanted to put up a 32 square foot billboard, I could do that under the code today. I could put up a new billboard. What we put in this restriction is that if the property exercises this consolidation ability, you would not be able to get any additional use off the premise signs on the property. So it would further restrict the signage abilities of the property in that regard.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Why set a maximum of 50 feet when all the others 48 feet?
48 feet is the width,
In the width.
usually.
So,
The 14
Not
by
height.
48 size that you see there with 672 square feet, I believe is the largest panel size that you'll see in Carroll County.
But that's not height. It's not
No,
48.
that's
It's
you.
length and
the-
width.
Exactly, length and width.
aren't most of them though in height 48 feet also?
Not to my knowledge.
I think they vary in height,
Okay.
yes. If anyone has more questions, we can, that was the content-heavy slide, I will tell you that. So just a quick sort of summary for you. Clear Channel Outdoor owns over 140 panels in the Carroll County region. If this code were to be, I should say text amendment, because the code exists. If the text amendment were to be adopted and utilized, the amendment could result in a reduction in the amount of panels, billboards in the county. There's nothing that would force anybody to utilize this section of the code. It would just be that if somebody wanted to make an application for a consolidation of signs, they would be eligible to make that application. The application would then be subject to the zoning administration review, and if it was approved, it would result in less signs in the county because it would consolidate and remove some of the existing signs. Because of,
Kelly,
Yes.
If a panel with 3 different advertisements on would be allowed, then you're saying that 3 signs somewhere else would be taken down.
No, I'm saying if you have a property with 3 signs on it and you go through the consolidation effort, you'll have a property with 1 sign on
So you're
it.
talking about one property then?
One property or the immediately adjacent property.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So would it be, you consolidate them, so are we looking at, say you have 2 signs, you make into one, would it be 14 by 96 feet, or would it be 14 by 48, then 14 by 48? I'm trying to,
That's the cap.
It would be, well, I think what you're saying is like, would you just put multiple
would
signs?
they just be, you know, because obviously if a sign now is 14 by 48, unless it goes digital, you're not consolidating 3 14 by 48
Right.
signs onto one, so would it be lengthway, you know what I mean? Like, what would we be looking at in terms of what the consolidation itself would look at? Like, how would it go?
The
The,
number.
I think I'll try to answer that, but tell me if this isn't exactly the question. The consolidation effort would look like one larger billboard. It might be double-sided, like the double panels that you see on 50% or more of them, but it would look like one sign. The size of it would depend on the size of what was being consolidated. That 14 by 48 that we proposed would be a maximum. So let's say that you took 3 signs on a property and you wanted to consolidate them. Hypothetically, if you totaled the square footage of those 3 signs and that equated to 1,000 square feet, let's use an easy number, you could not get a new sign of 1,000 square feet. You would be capped at that 672 square foot size. You would take those 3 signs, you would take them all down, and you would put up one sign that was that maximum 672 square feet if you could get it approved through the zoning administration. So that's what it would look like, one new sign being constructed. The size would just depend on what was being consolidated.
Now, you talked about lighting.
Yes.
The older signs have spotlights. But the illumination of a digital, what limits the gaudy sign that knocks your eyes out when you go by? In other words, what governs that? How many aluminums, I can't say that. You know what I mean?
The ordinance, to stay within compliance with the ordinance.
I guess what I'm concerned about is, they're asking about is a distraction.
Flashing lights.
Flashing lights, the distractions of flashing lights. You say that is all governed by a certain amount of brightness? Is that where we're heading with this? That's what I'm asking about.
We have equipment to make sure that that doesn't happen, to stay within compliance with the ordinance as it is today. So all of the digital billboards that you see Clear Channel operating in Carroll County today have that equipment. And anything new would have that as well.
What about flashing lights? I mean, is there,
There's actually a requirement in the county code, and that's why I was saying that when you see these digital boards, you're probably noticing that they are a little bit slower and less flashing than when you see like individuals just putting up signs on their businesses, because when they go through the permitting process and when they apply to the zoning administration process, one of the requirements is on transition times. And as Steve was saying, one of the requirements is that they must have a light sensing device that will adjust brightness as the ambient light changes. So there's a lot more, and I think you'll hear this from your zoning administrator either tonight or next meeting. There's a lot more restrictions on these signs than on businesses that just put up their own electronic on the premise sign.
That in the case, there was a new business with some signage on Liberty Road, and we had questions about the brightness and the flickering and all that kind of
Yes.
stuff, and the ordinance came into play.
But they weren't
Yeah,
48,
they weren't that
they weren't
big.
48 feet long.
They were entrance.
That's wider than this room.
And to clarify, our signs don't flash like that. And also, this would provide with the flexibility to either rebuild as another traditional printed or vinyl backed billboard sign, or digital if it's in the correct zoning. So we don't necessarily intend to rebuild everything to digital.
How long do you usually keep that ad up? How many seconds? You know, because I know you keep changing. Is there any
I think
restrictions
it's
or-
around 8 or 10.
Seconds?
Yeah.
You would know better than I
Yeah,
do,
think
but
it's 10. I think it's 10.
enough for whoever's going by to see
to
it?
see it.
Correct.
Where they can read it and actually see it till they pass it, and then it would change.
Yes.
Yes. And just, not that this is totally relevant to all use off the premises signs, but the digital signs can be really beneficial because they can allow for emergency postings to be put up instantaneously. It's a bit safer for the workers because they don't have to climb and get up to replace the display. And Clear Channel, and I'm sure other programs have this as well, but Clear Channel has programs where they'll work with local nonprofits to get up some advertising. I have an ad right now on the Finksburg one for the Montessori School of Westminster is hosting a Touch a Truck event that's free to the public. And so that is up on that billboard because they have an application and eligibility process for those. So the digital boards can be an added benefit as well in many regards.
Do you have any idea of how many signs would be eliminated throughout the county by doing this?
I do not, because it would all depend on whether you wanted to exercise this option or not. There's nothing that would force these property owners. I know that maybe to answer your question, we have identified at least 2 locations where this would be a possibility because of the amount of signage on one or an adjacent parcel. But I cannot say how many properties across the county would be eligible to apply for this. I don't think that you'll find that there's tons, but there are certainly a
The
few.
result would be less billboards.
Exactly. The end result, yes, would be less billboards.
Just some more clarification on what you presented, Kelly, because Mr. Smith asked about it, and I wrote down a note, the consolidation size, I had a question about that. No increase in square footage that currently exists.
Yes.
So those 3 signs that are 1,000, it can't go over the 600 now, right?
Correct.
Okay, that's, okay.
Yes. But for example, on the flip side of that, if you had 3 signs that only totaled 300 square feet, you couldn't exceed 300 square feet.
Right. Okay.
This is just kind of a synopsis of where we are right now. So we are here before you tonight for this introduction. We will be back before you at the next meeting this month. Our request of you is a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, who would then need to schedule this for a public hearing. And then there would be a public hearing and opportunity for testimony, and then the Board of Commissioners would coordinate a decision and deliberation on the text proposed.
So we allow digital signs on individual businesses now. You're just saying that you're going to try to apply the same standard in a way to the roadside signs, only they'll be bigger.
The road
So
size.
we're talking about size, we're talking about consolidation. I don't see anything else we're talking about.
It really is size and consolidation because as I think you were just saying, the digital provision exists today. We're not suggesting that be created. It would just be that if you still were eligible for that, you could still apply for that. We're not changing that in the code. Correct.
All right.
Newer structures that look better and are
Yeah,
far
some
more
pretty-
efficient to operate too.
Yeah,
That's your big advantage.
unless I misheard you, said that it would essentially be up to, I guess, the property owner that they would have to apply, but if you own the signs, wouldn't you be able to?
We would apply.
Usually it's whoever owns the sign applies, but the property owner is required to sign off on any zoning administration
Okay,
application.
that's where the clarification goes up. I
Yes.
figured if you guys own the signs and you wanted to do it, you should be able to do it. It
Right.
shouldn't be up to
Right.
the property owner,
Right.
you know. I mean, it should, but you know what I mean.
We have our
Yes.
lease with the property owner, and the property owner would be signing off on our applications to Carroll County.
Gotcha,
And
gotcha.
also to Maryland State Highway.
But it wouldn't be them just saying, oh, this provision's in.
I wanna
This is
do
what
it,
I want.
right,
and then
exactly.
up to- Okay.
Yeah, we need to
gotcha.
have a lease that allows for it too.
Yeah.
Are there distance requirements for all this from, like, state highway?
Yes.
I mean, I'll just bring one up that I know about that just seems to be an ill-advised place, and that's the sign, I won't name the people, but the sign at the corner of Kate Wagner and Ridge Road. That is a hindrance. So if you consolidate that one, please move it.
Okay.
That's a great big old sign that just, you can't see anything around it.
Yeah, and that's where accidents occur.
Terrible.
I think you'll find that
Just-
state
just a-
highway
just a
usually is
footnote to-
more
That I know about.
rigorous in that regard, in some ways, just because most of those signs are
Okay,
non-conforming.
so I guess what
but
I'm
yes.
getting at is, let's just say that particular sign is from your company. It may or may not be, I don't know.
Don't think it is.
And right now, it doesn't matter. But if you would consolidate, say, that sign, then would it be up to the zoning administrator then to take a look at and say, no, wait a minute, we're not gonna have that here. It's gotta be put somewhere else. And so is that the check and the balance of it?
Yes, that would be part of the process, that the zoning administrator would look at the application, and also during that application would consult with other agencies such as State Highway Administration or Bureau of Engineering for the county, to look at other things like site distance and so on, to make sure that we're not continuing an issue that everybody is aware of.
Yeah. Okay.
So you don't need the recommendation until next time.
Correct, yes. So next time, our zoning administrator will be here to, so she is going to be looking at state highways code and so on. The last thing we want to do is propose something in county code that is contrary to a state code and so on. So she's going to be looking at that. And as was mentioned by the Board of County Commissioners, they want to make sure that there are no unintended consequences with making these changes and so on. So we will be looking at that, and she will be here next meeting to talk about any sort of questions or issues that she's come up with, as well as present the recommended text amendment to the code, and we will then have whatever deliberations you would like to have and go from there.
So you'll have draft language for us to review at that
Yes.
point? Okay.
Is there any other information you want to make sure that we have at that meeting to help you out in your discussion?
I'd like to see some numbers. I know Clear Channel, you have 140. I'd like to see just the population of the billboard population. I guess that's in the registry.
Yes.
It is. Yeah, there's the non-conforming registry, and most of the billboards are located along Route 140.
I believe that.
I don't know that the registry is going to capture all of them, because anything that still is the allowed size, you're not going to see on there. But the registry certainly captures all of the non-conforming signs, so we can have that for you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nope, sorry, hold on, public comment.
Oh, yes, of course. Is there any public comment for the text amendment for use off the premises signs? Okay, seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You want the keyboard too?
I don't think so. Actually, if you could hit escape.
Got it. Look at that teamwork.
You. Okay. So we have a couple of master plan related things for you tonight. The probably the longest agenda item is going to be our overview of the work groups. So this is really going to be sort of a two-part presentation. Tonight we're going to give you an overview of the actual process that was used for the work groups and a few observations from them, that sort of thing, just to sort of set the context. And then at the November 5th evening meeting is when you'll receive the work group reports. So rather than trying to cram that all into one big long meeting, we thought it would be a little bit more efficient to split it up so that you get time to digest all of the information without being overloaded. So I'm going to give just sort of a brief overview of some of the things that were common among the three work groups, and then we're going to go one by one through each of those. I will also be giving the presentation for the economy work group. Andrew Gray, who was the facilitator for that particular work group, is now working for the city of Tawnytown. So you may see him in other capacities, but I'll be filling in for him tonight. All right, just a brief review of how we got to the work groups. As you may recall, we created the work groups, the Planning Commission created the work groups by resolution back in January 8th, with the purpose to study some particular topics in detail and provide a report on recommendations back to you related to land use, regulatory, policy, and capital or financial recommendations that you might consider including in the master plan. We went through a lot of back and forth on what the composition of those work groups should be, and there were three work groups: agriculture, economy, and housing. We landed on a mix of experts in the field for each of those three areas, various stakeholders, municipal representatives, as well as citizens at large. We did make an open call for volunteers so that we could make sure anybody who wanted to be considered for one of the work groups had an opportunity to throw their name in the hat. So our approach really was to draw on the expertise of people who are working in these areas, but also enable the voice of citizens at large to be part of that conversation. We'll get there.
Gotcha.
There we go. Okay, so there were some common threads to each of the work groups, even though they were each unique and kind of took their own individual approach based on the subject matter. So a few of the things that they all had in common included the fact that materials were provided ahead of time and throughout the meetings. There were open meetings, so anybody could listen to the meetings if they chose to. Each meeting had a chair each work group had a chair that was selected, and we did create meetings summaries for each of the meetings. Those were all posted on our master plan webpage or website. All of the groups reviewed some baseline information from studies or various other data and reports, and began their work with an identification of sort of game changers in each of these areas that they could consider in making their recommendations. All of the work groups had discussion and analysis of opportunities and constraints related to the needs or the trends in agriculture, housing, or economy. We had a midpoint joint meeting of all the work groups, and then ultimately the discussions within the work groups led to the formulation of recommendations that would be included in the report to address these 4 areas: land use, regulations, policies, or capital or financial investments. Next. There were a few challenges that we encountered kind of across the board, and we want to just be real upfront on what some of those challenges were. The first thing was time. So we did specifically set out to provide a limited time frame that we were asking people to commit to participate in these work groups. And the intention there was so that somebody knew what to expect, they could establish whether they were able to make that commitment, and hopefully we would get the best participation possible. We still, of course, had some who couldn't attend all the meetings, or something would come up at the last minute. That's to be expected. But that created kind of some constraints that an open-ended format would not have had. The other was the size of the groups. So we hovered somewhere in the 25 to 30 range for each of the work groups. We wanted to make sure we included a broad cross-section of stakeholders, but this meant that the groups ended up being fairly large. That meant we had to facilitate the meetings in a way that everyone felt they had an opportunity to make their voice heard. So it was a little bit harder to set those up so that everybody had a chance to participate. But that was something that we just had to strategize around. And then the third thing was the complexity of the topics. I mean, we're talking about the economy, housing, and agriculture in Carroll County. All of those have a lot of complexity to them, and trying to work through the different areas within each of those topics is a complex and multifaceted task. So this is one reason why the affiliations were laid out the way they were. In other words, trying to get people from various people who were sort of experts in the field or had some experience in housing or agriculture, because it was a complex thing, and we wanted to make sure that we were kind of starting with a little bit of a base of knowledge already with many people. It also meant the complexity of the topics also meant that we had a high volume of feedback that we needed to reflect in interim and final work products. So all of these challenges ultimately influenced how each of the facilitators approached their meeting, trying to work around our time constraints, trying to work around the fact that we wanted to make sure everybody had an opportunity to participate, as well as addressing some pretty complex topics. So now we'll launch into a little bit of a description on how each of those work groups were facilitated, given all of these constraints. So for the economy work group, there were several key topics that were addressed throughout the course of their meetings. They heard sort of an economic activity overview from our Department of Economic Development. They also went through the findings and implications that were contained in the Economic Development and Land Use Study. That was a study that was completed about a year and a half ago or so. They were given a copy of the study and an overview of the different growth scenarios and background information that was used to put that study together. The work group also looked at locational considerations for enhancing economic development opportunities, and then discussed the needed public investment and regulatory changes that might be needed in order to achieve some of those economic development goals. There were 26 work group members, and they represented citizens at large, folks involved in business development and business management, people who were involved in site development, We had members from governmental boards and commissioners, or boards and commissions, as well as county and municipal staff. I'm not going to read everything that's on this slide, but generally, we had 8 meetings for the economy work group, and they kind of flowed through that list of topics that I just went through. I did want to mention one thing here on meeting 2. They discussed the economic development and land use study, particularly the growth scenarios that were part of that study. The study had kind of arrived at a conclusion that scenario C, which isn't going to mean much to anybody who isn't familiar with that study, but it's kind of a slightly faster paced growth scenario. The study had suggested that that was the direction that that the county might want to pursue. The folks on the work group felt that scenario B, which was a slightly more moderated pace of economic growth, was a little bit more reasonable. Yeah, so they originally had planned on having 7 meetings. That went to 8 meetings so that they could cover everything that had been put out there for consideration. And I think they landed on consensus on all of their recommendations. Okay, so the approach that Drew used for these meetings was to really just build, for each meeting, to build on the previous one. So, so as we brought up the topics for discussion based on the agendas, the work group members were asked to provide input on that, and there were opportunities throughout the meeting to get points of clarification or have some discussion on particular topics. When there was some issues with trying to get things done within a limited time period, some alternative ways for people to provide feedback were made available. So there were platforms for providing digital responses, as well as collecting handwritten responses via sticky notes, and then also some small group exercises at each of the tables. When I asked if there were any particular challenges that Drew felt the work group encountered, the main one that he noted was that there were so many ideas that people wanted to share that it was difficult to kind of keep the discussion focused and to draw out of those ideas the real actionable recommendations that they wanted to include. And in some cases, people were encouraged to provide via email their recommendations so that they could be discussed at the next meeting. Okay, so a few thoughts, closing thoughts from Drew, is that he felt we were able to bring together a large group of people to get some really good input on the future of economic development in the county. The ideas that were collected fell pretty easily into one of the 4 areas that we were looking for recommendations around. And what you will hear from the work group reports next month are what the work group collectively agreed on. There weren't any major points or any major points where they didn't really reach a consensus. So that is the economy work group overview. I'm going to just pause now and see both Mr. Kane and Mr. Lester were the Planning Commission sort of liaisons to the economy work group. So we wanted to offer an opportunity if you had any observations or thoughts you wanted to share from what you experienced of that work group?
Similar, similar thoughts and what you just presented. I mean, it was a large group, and it was difficult to get through the agendas because everybody had an opinion. So you got 26 opinions and 26 rabbit holes and 26 separate discussions at some point and all that kind of stuff. And it was interesting dynamic. I thought that early on when the land use study was presented, the group, and you mentioned this, the criteria B or C instead of B, but we didn't spend a lot of time on that. I don't know if we should have, but it seems to me that there was a lot of money, I'm sure, spent on that study, and a lot of agreement in our commission here about that direction. And when the work group said, no, it should be the other, they kind of just dismissed it. I would have liked to seen a little bit more discussion at that point to try to say, well, we hear you, but, and I know then you're playing the hammer and all that kind of stuff, but hell, spend a lot of money on that kind of stuff, and it's already been vetted, and there's a lot of background behind all that the work group didn't see. There was a lot of information tossed their way, a ton of information. I think the work group participants got a little frustrated because it was a growth work group, and they were seeing the restrictions on growth. 85% of the land is in agriculture, and location of industrial and commercial properties. And hearing some of the feedback from the county folks who were trying to fill vacant spaces that they've had trouble filling, I think they were getting a little frustrated, like this is a growth thing, but we're not really, we're kind of handcuffed here. They felt handcuffed. I heard some frustration that, wow, we really don't have an opportunity to grow a whole lot. And that might be true, but so anyway, I observed that. I thought that was interesting. I thought there was a lot of rabbit holing, if that's a word or phrase, a lot of wordsmithing, a lot of editing on copy. I think that's why we needed 8 meetings because they were getting really nitpicky on, well, this word shouldn't say this, it should be them instead of there. I'm making stuff up, but there was a lot of time spent on detail and not, I would have liked to have seen it at higher level. I thought from an economic group, we kind of know, we know what the answer is. If you look at the financials for the county and the projections for revenue and taxes and the need to bottom line is that's what it's about, to grow those sources of income for the county to support services and all that kind of stuff. I thought we could have spent more time on that equation and said, here, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about, I'm making numbers up, 5% growth in revenue. How can we attain that? And then within that, here's what commercial can deliver. Here's what industrial can deliver. Here's what housing can deliver. Here's what increased taxes can deliver. And let the group kind of massage those numbers and think around that instead of, I think it was really broad for the group to try to understand what the end goal was instead of just growth. I think they were intimidated by that a little bit because I know when we were doing Andrew had those sheets with, the consequences, unintended consequences and all that kind of stuff. They were a little sideways on that, not sure what that meant and how to approach that. But overall, I thought it was really good. There was a lot of good opinions, and I do think we spent some time. I really thought we were having trouble getting some traction in the beginning, but then we gained some rhythm and some momentum. And then when we got into the discussions of building out well, it was about what was it? Not information highway, but the information corridor or the digital corridor and building those businesses and things like that. And then some people poo-pooed it because, that's 270, that's not Carroll County. I thought we were getting into those conversations, which I thought were really good. And then talking about designated areas for that to happen. And I thought we were heading in the right direction, but then somebody threw a curveball out there and we went, we're going to go back over here. So, but overall, I gained some insight and some notes for our master planning discussions about where I'd like to see things go, and I think the group would like to see things go. But it was like herding cats for a while, because it was, Chris, you sat in on a bunch, and Daphne, you sat in on the meetings too. It was good, but it was a little frustrating. It was busy. Overall, I think it was a great effort by the county to pull something like that together and try to harness some really smart people in that room and really representative of some good ideas. So anyway, I'll stop talking.
Thank you. And thank you for your attendance at the meeting and being able to kind of hear what was being discussed.
It was hard not to be able to participate.
I know.
Because, it was because I was observing, and somebody would come over and I'd say, which I probably shouldn't have, but it was interesting. It was a good experience for me too.
Good. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany, who's going to walk you through the housing work group.
Good evening. As Daphne said, I'm here for the housing work group. Like the economic development work group, we did have a study to work out of. So our key topics were taken directly from the housing studies, identified key housing needs. And so we examined barriers and opportunities and implications for addressing those, which were increased variety of the housing types, like more options by type, price, and size, such as townhomes or multifamily or smaller homes. And then there were high home values and barriers to home ownership. So home values are higher in Carroll than the regional average, and smart starter homes are limited, and renters here face higher housing problems than homeowners. There's the reduced disparities for protected classes, such as seniors or people with disabilities. There were limited transportation and walkability needs, and that increases access to jobs and services when addressed. There's the need for infrastructure expansion that was identified in the housing study, and that's limited by adequate public facility restraints on water, sewer, roads, school capacity, etc. And then there was the limited access to assistance and supportive services that was also identified as a key need, and recognized in the housing study that nonprofits face funding and coordination challenges. For the makeup of the housing work group, we had 29 members, and you can see on the screen there the affiliations of those and the makeup of that. For the, it was a broad range of expertise that was approved by the Planning Commission. They were all invited to join us on Mondays from 5 to 7. I'm going to just say I apologize. I thought that was supposed to stop blinking at a certain point. But anyway, to go on.
There's your billboard.
Too bright.
So Mondays, 5 to 7, our group met for a total of 8. That includes the 4th meeting, which was a joint meeting of all of the work groups. And there was one worth mentioning, that there was an affiliation that was approved by the Planning Commission for a rental housing management company. It did go unfilled. We reached out to several, and we could not find somebody that was willing to or able to attend. For the approach to the meetings, we used 3 key methods, and that was backcasting, small group discussions, and sticky note tracking. So backcasting, it is envisions a successful future state, something that's a goal. And then you work backwards from there to identify the necessary steps to reach that outcome. It helps align discussions with desired results. It's a technique that encourages systems thinking and clarifies priorities and milestones. We use the small group discussions because it promotes a diversity of perspectives to emerge and supported collaborative problem solving in a more manageable setting. There's 29 people, even if they weren't all there, it's hard for everybody to have a voice at the table. But that's what we were doing with the small groups, was giving everybody a voice at the table. And then sticky note tracking was to track that voice at the table. It encourages equal participation, captures a high volume of ideas quickly because we were very limited on time, and it ensures that all contributions are visible, it's right there on the table, and considered throughout the process. That allowed for us to have meaningful dialogues, strategic thinking, inclusive participation, and effective idea generation for actionable outcomes. We did have our challenges. I have several more than were listed in the economic development work group there. We did have our chair of the work group was Susan Krebs, and she was then appointed as commissioner in the county. So we did, for a solution for that, we had another member step up and volunteer to deliver the presentation next month, because that's really the only thing that was missed out on that. We had a large volume of material to cover, and so we did streamline the content by removing some of the initially proposed content, such as the unintended consequences. We did not go over those. Building trust in the process was a challenge. Some participants expressed that uncertainty about how the process was connected to the master plan, the big picture. So we devoted some time to reviewing the process framework, demonstrating how the work group objectives aligned with the long-term planning goals, and also how the backcasting was working in that as well. Well, there was some misinformation that was brought up and kind of shared amongst the group at times, so we had occasional misunderstandings or incomplete information that arose. We addressed these with dedicated presentations to supporting materials to clarify facts and provide consistent reference points. So there was such as you're familiar with, what is affordable housing? So this person has one idea and this person has another idea. So we use the baseline for that as being the 30% of your household income. So we would address it in that way, or the protected classes are addressed in the housing study. So when that came up as being like a little bit of a misunderstanding, we said, what is a protected class? Kind of explaining things so everyone would understand. Staying within the scope of the work group, it was really based around the housing study itself. So when it got outside of that scope on other housing issues that that people felt existed in the county, we tried to focus back in on concentrate on that. How are they related to the housing study or the needs that are identified? A lot of times they could bring them back home to that, and other times they were just out of the scope of the work group. We had time management issues. With a large group like that and a lot of information to cover, and addressing the scope and the other things, it did limit the meeting. We had limited meeting time, sorry about that, and we wanted to balance depth and efficiency. I modified the agendas, streamlined the activities, and added an additional meeting. That was how we ended up with 8 meetings, because we did have to add another one. And we actually did have 2 of the housing needs that were identified that we addressed via emailed surveys, because they seemed to be, we felt that they were not maybe as robust discussions. It was the transportation and walkability issue, and then also the infrastructure issue, which seemed to already be folding into a lot of the discussions as it was. So we created a survey and sent that out for people to share their views, and we recorded them that way and then incorporated them into the recommendations. We had managing different perspectives in a large group as a challenge. So we did do some assigned seating, and that was intentionally to try to get different backgrounds and different variations of people's voices at the table. So we would have not all like-minded people voices, so that it could be very diverse in the backgrounds and the conversations, and they'd be productive, inclusive discussions. So some of my thoughts, we had some positive notes. It was very engaging conversation. That was good and bad. It was very difficult to stop everyone when they're talking about identifying the issues, identifying the challenges, identifying the solutions, and we're limited time. So that was one of the things that was good and bad. And then some people said that it was a good learning experience. We heard that back from a lot of people, that they gained a lot out of it, and getting to know other people that maybe they even knew of the other person or the other people in the area, but they got this opportunity to actually meet them. And then some other observations on that was that we had an interesting dynamic where there was a surprising disagreement with a very unexpected outcome, because when we were going over the recommendations, we had certain things you could do with them. You could say, well, they're not for the master plan. They might go to a partner agency, or yeah, that's good for the master plan. And we had one that came up where a group of people did say that this does not belong in the master plan. It's not a good recommendation because it's not related. And then we had other people very opposed to that and said, no, this is exactly what needs to go into the master plan. And they ended up in a very unusual, unexpected outcome where they decided that they wanted the recommendation is to incorporate these recommendations into the text. So they wouldn't actually be recommendations of the master plan, but they are ways to incorporate the writing of the master plan itself into the master plan itself, to keep that housing element at the surface with affordability. And so you'll find out more about that next month. And then there were unintended consequences, although many of them were already woven into the discussions themselves as they moved forward through things. We didn't explicitly address or concentrate or focus on those unintended consequences set up for, like, what would this mean for the government or the health of rural and natural lands or the economy and jobs. We never really got down that route. And those are my notes and my thoughts. Mr. Smith and Mr. Soyson were the liaisons at the housing work groups. So if you have any thoughts you'd like to share.
First of all, the summary that you put up here was excellent.
Thank you.
It really did summarize that whole group. And it was interesting because there were the few people that had a lot of comments, and there were a lot of people that had very few comments. And they just kind of, the ones that didn't comment that often, didn't say a lot, but when we all got together and was able to zero in on issues, then they had really cogent suggestions. It was, again, it was hard not to say anything. But Stephen, you want to add anything to?
No, I mean, it was, and again, I think, like Mr. Kane, I at points in times probably said more than I should, but when you're kind of hearing people talking, and I'm like, okay, so from a zoning and planning commission point of view, I hear what you're saying, but no, I mean, it was a good mix. I mean, there was, like Richard said, some very strong opinions for, some members of the commission that there were kind of like, well, we've always done it this way, and we need to consider what, the last master plan said. But then you had some other people that had very strong opinions for, well, this is where we need to go. So I think, it was a good mix, and, and I think, I mean, the best part about it is I think that everybody did have the agreement, understanding that, yes, if we want to really just how important housing is, I mean, and how if you want to attract more economic development, more restaurants, more retail, more, all that type of stuff, well, you need the housing, because people are not going to drive from Baltimore County, into Carroll County to go, if you want people to live here, work here, it starts with, building townhouses, apartments, single-family homes that, are in that starter range. So it was good. I think
Yeah, a lot of the discussion was on affordability, and that is so hard, you know, because it's just, that's the value of houses right now, it's really high. And, you know, so we did get into like quad-type housing and smaller houses so that it could be more affordable. But housing is a tough one. As I'm sure all the other two were also, but it was an interesting experiment.
And we kind of brought up too, you know, Carroll County is an interesting county where you have so much ag land, but you're really, you know, with MDE rules, if you're building out in a rural area, how much land you actually need to put a house on due to septic, you know, setbacks and all that. But then you're limited to, okay, well, you might have, you know, a town that has a bunch of land in ag preservation, so the town really can't, or the municipality really can't expand to put in the infrastructure to put houses on, you know, city sewer and city, you know, city water and all that stuff. So definitely was very, you know, really got the mind working. So.
Very good.
Thank you. And next, Claire Stewart with Agriculture Work Group.
Good evening.
Evening.
All right. Okay, so in the Agriculture Work Group, we spent the first 5 meetings discussing the topics that are outlined here on the slide. In the first meeting, we kicked off with discussing just the current trends in agriculture. We talked about crop versus livestock farming, the role of secondary income, and then the decrease in the average farm size. And then I asked members of the work group to just write down the one most important change that the county could make to keep agriculture viable in the community. And those notes that, or those one changes that the work group members wrote, as I was going through the recommendations at the end, I was just kind of making sure that we had touched on all of those, and at least in discussion, and we had reflected on those as a work group as a whole. At the second meeting, we discussed leveraging the local ag sector as an economic driver. We discussed key issues and barriers facing farmers and agricultural businesses. And we talked about strategies to support farmers who are interested in diversifying their operations. The third meeting was set aside for a discussion around agricultural preservation, successes of and potential revisions to the county's current strategy for preserving ag land, and then regulatory challenges that might be hindering the process of those preservation efforts. The fourth meeting was the joint work group meeting. And at our fifth meeting, we discussed threats and opportunities. That included talking about the rural-urban interface. We identified best uses for remaining portions, and then potentially limiting preservation along major transportation corridors. We also discussed impacts of extreme weather events, and we talked about the next generation and some opportunities that we could provide for them, such as agricultural education programs, just to make sure that that next generation of farmers is prepared. And during meeting 6 and 7, we discussed preliminary and final recommendations. So all of the discussions for meeting 1 through 5 were wrapped into those recommendations that were brought forward at meeting 6. Okay. So our work group was 26 members. We had a wide representation of knowledge, perspectives, and experiences. We had governmental boards and commissions. We had representation from the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Board of Zoning Appeals, and the Environmental Advisory Council. We had county staff who were either farmers themselves or had a professional interest in Carroll's ag sector. We had 4 representatives from agricultural support businesses. community resource stakeholders, including the Carroll County Farm Bureau, Soil Conservation District, UMD Extension, ANC Bank, and Carroll Community College. We had 6 farmers, all who produced a variety of agricultural products and who were from different areas of the county. And then finally, we had 3 citizens at large. Okay. All right, so the approach that I used for the meeting facilitation was to create a structured and engaging environment that encouraged meaningful participation from all workgroup members. I posed targeted questions, introduced focused discussion topics, and incorporated exercises, all designed to draw out those varying perspectives from each of the members. I think this process promoted an open dialogue and also ensured that each member had a voice in the recommendations of the work group. And ultimately, the input generated through those discussions provided the foundation for drafting our recommendations, or the work group's recommendations to the Planning and Zoning Commission. The main strategy I used was small breakout group discussions followed by report outs. I think this gave, I think it created a more comfortable environment for folks to have those dialogues in smaller groups. And then each of those groups was given an opportunity to share out, and that opened up the dialogue to the whole work group and all of the members at one time. Okay, so I highlighted here 2 challenges that I felt like I met throughout or the work group as a whole met as well, throughout the process. The first being that unlike the economy work group and the housing work group, there was no prior study or consolidated research effort to serve as the foundation for this group. So rather than beginning with that existing framework, the topics were developed through direct engagement with field experts, input from local farmers, and then just available reports, data, and all of that, and the trends, of course. And then ultimately, the work group did have the final input into which topics we would be discussing as we work through the sessions. And the other challenge, I think Daphne touched on this in the introduction, but I think it was a really tight schedule. I think it was a quick turnaround time for materials. By the time you were finishing one meeting, you were just the next day prepping for 2 weeks out. So we did build in a little bit of a longer break, I think halfway through, which was helpful. It kind of gave everyone a chance to regroup and just talk amongst ourselves and make sure we're all on the right path. Okay, and then a couple positive notes. I thought the joint work group meeting was really helpful. I heard a lot of positive feedback from the members who attended, just that they were able to have discussion with members from the other work groups and just hear what their challenges were and what their topics of focus were. And then the second point was the ag work group had an average attendance of 77%. I thought that's great. I think it really showed devotion and dedication to the outcomes of what we're presenting to you all at the November meeting. And then I also just highlighted a couple of quotes that were presented to me from some of the work group members. So at this time, I would like to offer Mr. Robertson to provide any reflections you might have, and then I would open it up to everyone for any questions.
Well, I'd like to thank you for all your work. That was a monumental task to make farmers sit for a while and listen to somebody.
Y'all did great.
Believe me, I know. Just a couple thoughts about this. I think one thing that we might have learned from this is how adaptable agriculture is. And one size doesn't fit all. For instance, the equine industry has grown, the dairy industry has diminished. Just a prime example of that. And that's just one thing. Wineries have grown, other things have diminished, but agriculture is still there. It's still very viable for the county. It adds a lot to it. I think one thing that maybe struck me is possibly the lack of understanding of how we got where we are. And what I'm talking about is at one time you could put 100 houses on 100 acres out in what we now call the ag zone. So how did we get to where we are now, where we're trying to protect that land with the zoning that we have and how important that zoning is? I think we possibly got around to it eventually, but it took a while to get there. And that's nobody's fault. That's the way things happen. We look at now and maybe not why we got to where we are and what we're trying to protect. So I think there was at the end of our meetings, I think there were a lot of people that started to say, we have been very dedicated in trying to keep agriculture viable. We've spent a lot of money. The citizens have really been behind us. The commissioners have, from day one, from the inception of the zoning rules, they've really held fast to that concept. And I think it's served us well. And I think there were many members of that group that all of a sudden kind of had that realization of why we're where we are and what we're looking at in the future. But one big frustration, and I don't know what any of us can do about it, is that we start out on a course and then we get sidetracked by state mandates that we have no control over something that we thought we did have control over. Solar on ag is my biggest problem. With the amount of commitment of money and resource that has been put towards helping agriculture survive and stay viable, and then to see these state mandates come down, I think the group as a whole realized that this is something that it's a problem, but what are we going to do about it? So there was a frustration in it. And one thing that I think is going to be very interesting, the staff spent a lot of time on doing citizen surveys. You went out in the community, you asked people what they considered Carroll County to be, what should our future be, what are our problems. Now I think it's going to be very curious for us to see and compare that citizen survey, the expectations of the citizens out there for the future, versus the land use study, versus the actual work group findings. I'm really curious to see where we started with the expectations of the surveys and the meetings of the general public, all the way down to the work groups, and then the findings that we're going to finally give to the commissioners or make recommendations to the commissioners. I'm really curious to see how that's going to play out. There are other things that I'd like to talk about, but just one more thing about agricultural land preservation. I think that's one thing that really supported and helped to support the land use as far as zoning and holding our zoning. That's so important, and I think ag preservation was the key to helping make that happen. It made it harder for us to devour land that we might not have wanted to devour at the wrong time, at the wrong place, at the wrong spot, that we couldn't keep up with the infrastructures and things that we have. I think it's going to be curious to see how all these other institutions come down. And you talk about slow growth or quick growth or fast growth. Carroll County has used a deliberate approach using agriculture as one reason why we should be very deliberate on how we view our future. We need growth, but it has to be very subtle on how we do it some way, in some ways. Takes me back to agricultural land preservation. I really believe that we need to put a plan together for the future. If that would entail a study commission or something in the future, I'm not making the recommendation, I'm just throwing some ideas out. But I think as we went through the committees, there was a lot of questions on, okay, so we've done all this, now where do we go from here? It's very good, very enlightening. And I thank the staff for all their work that they put into this.
Thank you.
Oh,
Are there any questions for any of us?
I think you've all done an excellent job. I only sat in on, I think, the work group, and it was very educational for me to see how it all kind of combined there. But I personally am glad that these guys all did the work groups. So, not that I wouldn't have, but you all came out and did them right up. So, very good.
I know we have a couple of members from our work groups here tonight. I didn't know if anybody wanted to say anything in response to what we've shared here.
Well, I think that it was like pulling teeth to get some information out. I thought that was very difficult for people to really say what they needed to say or what they wanted to say. I thought that part of it was difficult. So that was just my take on it, and I think you ladies that ran it were amazing because you could have gone nowhere.
Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Pamela Malkin, and I was on the housing work group. And the one comment I didn't hear from your summaries was that at almost every meeting, we came down to the issue of water and sewer. And that if we didn't have access to water and sewer, we cannot have lesser expensive housing, which meant that there needed to be an ability for towns to grow. And that if all of the land around the towns is protected by agriculture preservation, then we're dead in the water. We have nowhere to grow. And that was pretty much the summary that I got after all these weeks and weeks and weeks of meetings. If we don't have infrastructure, we cannot grow, which is why I actually recommended that we have an area where we add infrastructure, that we actually plan on having in Carroll County an area of growth where we actually add maybe a new town, because I couldn't figure out how else you can do it. So that was the one comment that I'd like to add regarding housing.
Thank you. Anything else from the ladies sitting there?
I'm just listening. This has been education for me because I was never involved in any of this. My husband did it all, and I just did what I do, which is run my farm. So I have had a really big experience in what really goes on, and I think it's really difficult. So a lot of the problems I don't know how you can ever solve. So But it is good that we're looking at them and certainly trying to solve them for the county.
Which group were you? Which group?
This is Ms. Krim. She's with the agriculture group.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
Okay, well, thank you both for being a part of this. I know it was a commitment, but very much needed, and it will give us something to work with as we go forward.
Before we move on, public comment, even if there's no additional public.
Okay. Is there any additional public comment? Seeing none, we are, no, we're not? Oh, number 9.
Number 9. No,
We're not
I
done.
didn't say.
We're number 11.
Not so fast.
Huh? Oh, we did that one. Oh, yeah. We are number 9. Sorry, guys.
I was trying to tell you something.
Okay, I'm back with you.
All right. Now we are looking a little bit forward from here. And what I wanted to do is just take a little time with you guys to kind of scope out where we go from here. So we're going to talk about what our work sessions could look like, both so that we kind of keep in mind the big picture, but also so that we can anticipate how we might move through this process. The staff can prepare everything that you all need to move through the process, and we have a good course forward. So just a little reminder of how we got to where we are now. A little more than a year ago, we started this whole update process with a series of work sessions. We had 2 with the Board of County Commissioners, 1 with you all, and then a joint one in September that sort of helped us clarify our direction with the master plan update. And just as a reminder, through that process, we identified 5 driving ideas that are kind of the big topics that we want to make sure we touch on in the course of this update, and I'll show those on the next slide. We also affirmed that the existing plans, so this includes both the county master plan as well as the Finksburg Corridor Plan and the Freedom Community Comprehensive Plan, really only need minor updates. We're not talking about a total overhaul of the master plan. So, so that's sort of where we've been focused in terms of looking at the background information that needs to be taken into consideration, and where we'll try to keep our discussions focused as we roll in the work group recommendations and other conversations that we'll be having. So those 5 driving ideas included housing options for households of all kinds, an economy that supports the community, a commitment to rural Carroll County, infrastructure that meets the needs of tomorrow, and working together to plan the future. And these 5 areas were how we organized our open houses, how we gathered a lot of the community feedback, so that we could understand how people felt about these 5 areas and the things that were of most concern to them, as well as anything that they thought we were doing really well at. So those will continue to be kind of foundational to our discussions moving forward. I just wanted to very quickly remind everybody of what we're required to include in our plan, because some of those requirements have changed since the last master plan was adopted. So you see on the screen the plan elements that are required under the land use article of the Maryland Code. For the most part, these are all in our current adopted master plan. We do have a housing chapter in that plan, but since the 2014 plan was adopted, there is now a new housing element that's required by the state. So we'll need to really make sure that we're addressing everything that we're required to under that, that section of the land use article. I also noted that last legislative session, there was a new requirement for the sensitive areas element to include a review of wildlife habitat and connectivity. So we'll make sure that that gets integrated into that section of the plan. And the other thing that I just noted, there are now, you may be familiar with the 12 planning visions that have been part of the plan since 2014. Those have been revamped a little bit and relabeled, or the new label for them is the 8 planning principles. We can dig into these at a later date. They're not radically different than what we have addressed in our plans, but we'll want to review these and kind of make sure that where we're landing with things is also working to address the 8 planning principles established by the state. These slides I'm not going to spend a ton of time on, but I just wanted to call your attention to section 3-201 of the land use article. This is where we talk about where the state law talks about how plan preparation should unfold. It's a lot of kind of high level things, but I just wanted to put those out there as a reminder. What we're talking about is preparing a plan by carefully and comprehensively surveying and studying present conditions and projections for future growth. So that's sort of what we've been doing in the first year almost of our work here. All the information that we provided to you through the topics and trends briefs and the data handbook and the various presentations that we made to you. We're giving you the information to study the current conditions and look at the projections for the future. That'll continue throughout this process as we get deeper and deeper into it, but that's the foundation that we've been trying to build. You'll see on the rest of that page, as well as the following page, some of the higher level goals that we're supposed to be factoring in as we prepare the plan. So you can see the plan is supposed to be promoting good civic design and arrangement, healthy and convenient distribution of population, health, safety, and general welfare, which is kind of the foundation of planning, efficiency and economy in the development process, and provision for transportation, public safety, light and air, conservation of natural resources, prevention of environmental pollution, wise and efficient expenditure of public funds, adequate public facilities, and an adequate supply of other public requirements. So these are all sort of the bigger picture goals that really underscore why we are preparing the plan and what it needs to address. And this is I just added this in here because it also refers to those, the language in here right now is the plan visions. That will be changed very soon to reflect the planning principles that actually just went into effect today. All right. So that's kind of where we are, why we're doing this, and I wanted to make a proposal for how we might move forward from here. These are just my suggestions, and I really would like to open this for your discussion and suggestions on how this would best work for you guys. So the first thing that I think might be helpful is to go back over those required elements and make sure we are going to hit everything that we need to make sure is in the plan. But also kind of close the loop on what we've talked about so far. So do a little bit of a recap of our assessment phase information, some of your observations, things that you noted you want to make sure are included in the plan. I'll pull all of that together and give you a little bit of a recap on that. And then also recap what we heard from the public in our surveys and open houses. To your point, Mr. Robinson, we'll want to see how that all feeds together with the work group reports, with other information that we've uncovered. And it is going to be a real balancing act. Even just listening to the discussion of the 3 work groups, there are some places where in order to try to achieve one set of aims, another group's aims might be compromised. And your job is to try to find that balance. Okay, so that's sort of where I would suggest we start, recapping what we've heard so far. Then you'll receive and review the work group reports. And then my suggestion would be that we just start going through the different plan sections and looking at what needs to be updated, what you might need some additional information on, how we might integrate the Freedom Plan, the Finksburg Plan, the driving ideas into this update process. That would be multiple work sessions. That will not be one work session. And I had given you copies of all the plans to start looking through. Gail has some additional copies if anybody still needs some. But that would be kind of the I don't want to call it tedious, but it'll be, going through section by section, looking at what we need to update, how we can reflect what we've heard so far in an updated plan. We are looking at having a planning summit with the municipalities because this is something that we've heard over and over again, how essential cooperation with the municipalities is. Pamela mentioned the need to provide water and sewer service. They're a critical piece of that puzzle. That will probably be early next year, early 2026, when we are able to get that pulled together. But of course, anything that comes out of that, then we'd want to be able to integrate into the next step, which would be revisiting the policies and recommendations that are in the plan right now. So that we can incorporate new or modified recommendations based on that planning summit, based on the review of what needs to be updated, and the work group reports. That also would be multiple work sessions. Then I think we want to get into looking at reviewing and modifying maps in the plan. Some of them are just going to be part of our update process, so maybe we've got a new community facility we need to add to the map. The trickier thing is going to be the future land use designation map, and that I've kind of put towards the end of this process because it seems like if we're looking at recommendations related to housing or agriculture or even some of the things that weren't covered under one of the work groups, we'd want to have those ideas kind of bubbling up before we try to put something on a map. But again, we can kind of lay out this strategy and see how it works. If we need to tackle some of these things earlier or later, we can always move them around. Then I think having some significant public outreach and maybe even some focus groups to get feedback on the preliminary ideas that have been generated here would be essential. That can even be happening. It doesn't have to be one single point in time. It can be happening over a period of time. It can be happening at multiple iterations of that. But certainly want to make sure that once we have some kind of draft ideas together, that we can go back out to the public and kind of test it a little bit. Then the last two things are, getting towards the end of the process with you all, and that is to pull it all together into a draft updated plan that reflects the outreach and feedback. And then we go through the 60-day review and approval process. So that would be sending that out for public comment, having a public hearing, and then going back through any comments that you receive to see what modifications you might want to make to the plan before you're finally comfortable with approving something that would go to the Board of County Commissioners. They also will hold their own public hearing, but I didn't include that process on this slide. So that's kind of how I'm thinking of it, but for sure want to open it up for your suggestions on how this process might work better for you, suggestions that you would have for moving things around, adding things, whatever.
I think we want to get it right, so I think this is a good plan to move forward with, so, personally.
Daphne, just a question. When do we have the Planning Commission has a session with the commissioners? We have one session coming up with the commissioners to bounce back ideas and feedback from our plan. When does that happen?
So we had another joint work session planned, but not on the calendar.
Okay.
And so we were looking at doing that after you receive the work group reports. That would be in addition to, excuse me, in addition to the planning summit, although the planning summit would also include the Board of County Commissioners. But that would be kind of 1, 2, 3, sort of between blocks 3 and 4 on that slide there. Yeah.
Okay. Mike?
I'm good. It's good, great start. And if it's like work groups, we'll probably jump off and find some new directions. But, I mean, the devil's in the details here.
Yeah.
And you have to go through piece by piece and check off to make sure we're meeting the state requirements and all that kind of stuff. So I think, a systematic approach is the proper way to go about this.
Yeah, and we'll make really sure that we're able to pull all these ideas that we've gotten so far and feed them back to you so that you can consider them. And that does have to be sort of systematic so that we're able to make sure we're getting everything in front of you for your consideration. But we also want to make sure that we have ample opportunity for additional ideas to come forward, either through the consultations with the commissioners or the municipalities, or through the public feedback as this kind of continues to evolve. And you'll see I noted on, I think the third block in there, additional studies as needed. If we're, talking about a particular section of the plan and you guys feel like you just really need more information about something, or there's a recommendation that's been made by one of the work groups that you really want to understand better, we can definitely do whatever additional research or bring forward additional information for you So it doesn't have to be like a linear sort of thing. That may be something that we come back to at a future meeting, once we've had an opportunity to collect that, just so that you have the information that you need.
Daphne, there's a little bit of history that I would like you to do. I hope it doesn't take, but we've talked a lot about the relationship between the municipalities and the county. Was there ever a written agreement or just a commitment that we're going to try to work together? I mean, is there anything in our history that specifically said, you know, we're going to dedicate a certain amount of time, money, and effort to make sure our municipalities stay viable? We've talked a lot about it.
Yeah.
But is there anything, I mean, that
So I think we have something sort of along that lines in our town-county agreements.
now that's where I'm heading.
Yeah, those are for sure vehicles for building good collaboration, for leveraging strengths, and there are, you know, it spells out, for instance, the liaison planner role where Tiffany and Drew and Claire and the other folks who have been part of the comprehensive planning staff have been liaisons to our towns. But as far as, this is one reason why I think this, the planning summit, why the presentations that have been made to you all from the towns, and Chris and I have been meeting with each of the towns as well, really trying to drill down on this question of how can the county best support the towns. There are some places that have very explicit programs, funding sources, various things that they do to make sure that their towns are able to thrive. Those are some of the things that we're trying to get at with these, by posing these questions. Because we've talked a lot about coordination with the towns, but what does that tangibly amount to, I think, is the question that we're trying to get an answer to.
That's a huge question.
Huge question.
And we see, I mean, you spoke about sewer and water, and, you know, we're hearing a common theme. It's so important to have these municipalities come in and talk with us and see what their visions are. And some have a grand vision of the future based on certain things. Others know their limitations, but they don't know how to get around those limitations. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. I just would like to see what kind of role, in other words, if we want to grow as a county and then provide places for people to live, you know, one of the starting points is inward and upward. So how do we do that and still meet our vision of what we want this county to be?
Yeah.
So it's a huge problem. It's like, I don't know, but I don't think it's an unanswerable question, but it's certainly one with a lot of dips and valleys and turns and dead ends and on and on. So I just was wondering, you know, how, I guess maybe we should ask the commissioners that question. You know, what is their vision of
The relationship.
county relationship with municipal relationship? And if nobody else is going to answer it or ask it, I would be glad to. Because I would like to know what their vision is, because that's so important in what we're talking about here, the next 10 years.
It's important to the success of the county, no question. In my prior life, when I worked in the publishing business, I oversaw 20% of the Gannett Company. And at that point, it was 126 newspapers, I think it was. All different markets, all different sizes. Louisville to Salisbury, Stanton, Virginia, which they get very upset if you say Staunton. Stanton. And small markets, huge markets, all that stuff. very independent, very autocratic, and that's the way we wanted it. Corporate, we wanted it to be like that. But corporate had a set of guidelines that had to be met, and, reporting and, all that stuff, and regular meetings and feedback and discussions and check-ins and all this kind of stuff to manage that independence, to make sure we were all, well, in the private sector, meeting the shareholder need and driving profitability and all that kind of stuff, new products and things like that. So it was, the county office to me is like corporate, and managing the municipalities is like those independent newspapers or businesses, and how, because they're all different. They have to be managed differently. There are different sizes. There's different resources they have to work with. Corporate resources are available to all, et cetera, et cetera. So I agree with you, Ralph. I think that's a hugely important for the success of the county. And, you can't have, and I'm not saying it's like this, you can't have, somebody off on their own tangent, doing their own thing, without some accountability back to the county. And it works vice versa too. So, yeah, it's got to be addressed.
It's an interesting idea, and I think some of the municipalities may not quite think that way.
Well, some of the newspapers didn't think that way either. They didn't enjoy, I'm from corporate and I'm here to help. Well, the other way I looked, when I managed it was a library with 25 different markets, and a little old engine in Stanton who had a number to meet and all that kind of stuff, but didn't have the resources or the idea generation that a Louisville, Kentucky had, or a Cincinnati, or New York. The library was there, and if somebody hadn't thought of it, somebody else did. And if somebody hadn't implemented it, some other market did. And there was all this sharing of information to help the process. So you didn't have to start on the first floor of an idea. You could jump in on whatever and make it happen quicker and get an understanding of what needed to happen to realize the end goal. So I think that's an opportunity for the county to manage it and look at it that way.
I think what's disturbing to me is that we've had certain municipalities come in and say, we'd like to, we wish we could, we can't. So why can't you? Well, we know some reasons why. We sit up here, we hear it. But, so let's get to the point and say, well, if you can't, what can we do as a county to make it happen? Because it just seems like a couple of the municipalities that came in, they have room for growth, but they can't. And the reason why is that common theme of water, sewage, infrastructure. So, where should we put our resources to achieve this goal that people put on this survey? It said, we want to see Carroll County rural, or we want to see Carroll County stay as open as possible. But then we have so what's the solution? Well, the solution is something that the municipalities come in and say, we can't because of this and this. And there's the symbiotic relationship that I would like to see us put some element in this plan that addresses that, or an attempt to address it.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
Instead of saying, well, we'll deal with it in the next 10 years, let's deal with it now. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
Richard, any thoughts?
Not anymore.
You can have thoughts.
I know.
Yeah.
Steve?
I mean, I like, what you're proposing here. I mean, granted, I wasn't involved in any of the other previous master plans, but I just feel like this is just very, very important, to drive. It just, I don't want to say crossroads, but it's very important right now for the county to, we want to do this, we want to preserve this, and all the while too, trying to navigate, fighting's not the right word, but, you know, dealing with the state of Maryland and all the laws that they're passing, which are seemingly in a lot, at least, you know, to me, or a lot of them are being passed to almost try and take decision-making ability away from the counties, or especially a county like ours that, you know, doesn't fall into the Montgomery County or PG County in terms of what our economics are and what we do. So I just think that the more thorough, and I mean, granted, we can't take 5 years to do the 10-year plan, but the more thorough that we are, I just think that this is just, it's going to go one way or another, and then I think this is the 10-year plan that's going to do it.
Yeah. So with that, I'll say I will plan on crafting agendas that allow for a dedicated master plan work session pretty much at every meeting. And we'll try to make sure that in advance of that, you know exactly what we'll be talking about. You have the information or resources available to prepare for that. And then we'll just plan on spending a chunk of time at each meeting going through this review process.
Okay. So is there any additional public comments? Would either of you ladies like to say anything else? No? Okay. Well, again, thank you for working and being a part of this. As you can see, it's not a one and done, certainly. We have to move forward, and you've been a big part of this. So thank you very much. Okay, now,
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Good evening, folks.